After a night of tough decisions, one leading to her continued survival at the cost of a life of a thin blood, Jessica now lays her head to rest as the sun begins to rise, contemplating whether the decisions she made were the right ones, even if she does continue to see the next night, and the other does not. And many, many options lay before Jessica on this evening. 4 from before and 2 new ones. Faith and Myth Part 2, which I am interested in seeing. And a nosy reporter. There's a sleazy reporter from a gossip magazine sniffing around Sophie's haven. She could use your help with the problem. It's always good to help those, and many a time she has said we owe her so much already, so to play the game and help Sophie might be the right call here. I am interested in what Benoit wants, but the one who cared for me, at least in her own strange sense, will go to take care and help her as well. The street lights filter into the apartment in a stark white glow, as if someone were shooting a movie outside. The art pieces display a tasteful expense, entirely fitting the image you have of Sophie. It feels as if 1,000 sins have been committed on these premises, most of them under her benevolent hospitality. Sophie comes to greet you as you enter the living room, shaking her head. You understand that people judge me based on how you dress, don't you? Sophie looks at your clothes as if resigned to your sartorial limitations. I've tried to dress inconspicuously because of the masquerade. That's very sensible of you. I suppose I should commend you for that. Sophie walks to the window and looks out, the street lights playing on her features. She reminds you of a queen contemplating the unfortunate limitations of her subjects. You'd think that as a vampire, at least we wouldn't have to worry about the vultures of the press. Unfortunately, when you have power and ability, there are always parasites trying to feed on you. I used to have a journalist friend. Then you know what they're like. Sophie steps away from the window and settles down on a sofa, a wine glass with red liquid in it. Blood, treated as not to spoil. You've become good at noticing the scent, even from a distance. She doesn't offer you any as you cautiously sit down across from her. This awful man has been stalking my apartment with a camera. He's gone through my trash, talked to my neighbors. Please be a dear and explain to him that there's nothing here for him. Is this about the masquerade? That's a big deal for us, right? Indeed, and you're learning. Isn't this dangerous for all kindred? Of course it is, if we don't make it go away. Do you know anything about this reporter? Man, woman, young, old, anything like that? All gossip reporters look the same to me. Time for you to go. I have business to attend to. You leave the apartment as Sophie disappears into another room. You don't have a clear idea of the games she plays with the city's mortal and immortal power structures, but she always seems to be making a move. Outside on the street, there's a slight warm drizzle, the kind that gets under your clothes and makes you want to take a shower when you get back to your own haven. No reporters immediately jump out to you. For a while, it feels like nothing is happening in the New York night. People are walking past you on their way to whatever nightlife diversions help them forget their sordid lives. As you contemplate going back inside and telling Sophie you're not looking for a new career as a lookout, you suddenly notice the lens of a camera pointed at you across the street. Hey! You yell and run across the street. It's a man you're sure you've seen somewhere before. Rotund, pasty, Someone who spent too much time in badly ventilated rooms stained with cigarette smoke. You enter an alley, a dark, dingy space between two tall buildings. Once upon a time, a place like this might have worried you, made you think of muggings and violence. Now it's clear that the most dangerous thing here is you. The man you're following seems to realize this too. He holds his camera in front of him like a shield, its heavy objective resting on his paunch. With the start, you recognize him. You remember the face, the shaded sunglasses from a picture next to a byline in some trashy paper someone thrust in your face at a company party. His name is Frank Doherty, and he'd taken pictures of one of your investors feeling up a sex worker at a nightclub. You'd been there too, and the funny thing was, what Doherty showed in the photo was just the tip of the iceberg. After all, work hard and play hard was the order of the day. Hey, don't go around scamming people like that. Apparently that's the Frank voice. I looked at him, that's just what came forward. I apologize. I recognize you, I'm a huge fan. Welcome to Knuckletown. Those are my options as my Ventru? If I was playing this and this was an actual tabletop game, my move in this situation would to be maybe let him know that I recognize him, or at the very least let him know that I know his work. And for a pretty penny, maybe put him under my thumb. Make him work for me. You gotta start on the ground floor, and this little scumbag who can snap you some pictures, he could be your first information gatherer. I'm a huge fan. Wow, you're Frank Doherty. I'm a huge fan. I love your work.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to have one's work appreciated.
Lean into them. So, a reporter, huh?
Yes, democracy dies in darkness, as they say. It's a noble calling. Do you live here? I'm working on a story about a local resident. Her name is Sophie Langley. Everybody knows her in high society circles. She's a redhead, pretty as a picture, they say, and there were a lot of pictures of her through the years. That's a thing, in fact. Look at this.
Frank pulls out his phone and starts showing you pictures. Some have been downloaded from news sites, while others are photos from the society pages of newspapers from past decades. All show Sophie. She has different clothes, hairstyles, makeup, names, but the face remains the same. That's so strange. So what do you think's going on? Gotta act a little on the blank, and I want to know what he knows. And just letting him feed information to me is probably the best way, with slight nudges in the right direction.
Beats me. That's why I'm here to find out.
Well, you must have a theory about what's happening.
I have a theory too, but before I print my theory, I need facts to back it up. 3 words. Extreme plastic surgery. All the celebrities do it. Only her doctor is better than the rest. Yeah, that's it, buddy.
You look critically at the photos on Frank's phone. You're thinking the world's best plastic surgeon is working out of this alley.
Okay, fine. I don't know what this is about. So how would you explain it?
Ooh, okay. Interesting choices. I don't know what is... man. This could bite you. Just saying I know Sophie personally could bite you. It's a hoax. Maybe not, but I might be able to get him on my side and use him, play the game a little bit. You gotta understand that I know Sophie pretty well. We move in the same circles.
So what can you tell me about her?
See, this would make her, if she's a philanthropist, It might make her beloved by mortals, and she is a Toreador. She might like that. Secretly, she's a great philanthropist. Gives to charity all the time.
I'm sure she kisses a lot of babies too, who cares? I gotta have something usable.
Alright, I definitely want to use my dominate while I'm here. So, you look Frank in the eyes. They are red behind his shaded glasses. Veins popped from years of neglecting his body. Suddenly, he seemed soft, easy to manipulate. His will nothing but plaster crumbling under your boot. Go home and destroy your research on Sophie Langley. As your vampiric gaze takes over Frank's mind, he feels less than a person and more like an automaton, a machine you can program. Perhaps this is why older vampires are said to think of humans as nothing but animals. How can you consider someone a thinking person with free will when you can override them at any moment? Frank is mumbling, fondling his camera, inching around you to the entrance of the alley. He looks sad and worn as he goes. A man who used to be something, now just a shell. It feels almost embarrassing to use the powers of your blood on someone so weak. At least you're pretty sure he'll stay away. You're welcome, Sophie, but now we find ourselves slightly hungrier. It's dangerous to go back to the church while we're hungry, but I have to know what he wants. You've started to look at churches differently since your last encounter with Benoit. You're not sure what happened inside, but it was unavoidably real. You felt it. When Benoit mentioned that being in the presence of Father Anthony's faith would eventually kill someone like you, an undead being, you believed him. It doesn't seem to be very common, though. In New York, you pass thousands of people every night, and none of them have made you feel so afraid and insignificant. If you were to encounter someone like Father Anthony in the subway or a nightclub, you would know. There are many churches in the 5 boroughs, and you're pretty sure most of them don't contain someone whose faith can touch you in this way. Yet you've become wary. They just might. Still, tonight the cathedral looks as before, a striking landmark acting as a symbol of faith for people who have no idea that vampires exist in their midst. For them, questions of faith and myth are theoretical or philosophical. For you, those same questions suddenly define the meaning of your new existence. You sneak into the cathedral like an old hand, as if going to church had been a regular part of your life. Inside, the cathedral's almost deserted. You're not sure if you'll be meeting Benoit alone. The idea of feeling Father Anthony's faith on your undead flesh freezes you with terror. Benoit is waiting for you in the front pews of the cathedral in the exact same spot where you saw Father Anthony. Worried, you approach, but you don't feel the touch of faith that shook you before. Benoit nods as you sit next to him in the pew. It's interesting, because I'm assuming she's saying many kindred would wonder what we are in reference to Cain and the legends of Cain and how kindred began, whether the legends of Cain are myth or truth. The tabletop RPGs leave that very open on purpose. There's plenty of evidence to say that it is true. There's plenty of evidence to say, no, it's not. It just depends on how you like it. I personally like to change it from game to game. I never run with the same mythology in the same campaign. I just think there's too much left open for you to explore so many different themes in so many different fun ways. The only time I ever keep it the same, obviously, if it's like a long stretching campaign or campaigns that take place in the same world. But if we decide to do a brand new one in a brand new city and a brand new thing, I'll always change the Cain lore because I always want my players to be unsure as to whether Cain is real. And by keeping it that way, it's almost like Joker, right? Like his history is always different. So every world that we play in is going to have a different history that still has the same ties to the questions that are in the games. I'll start here, because I love this stuff, but that's just an assumption. We'll see if this is true. I don't like this Benoit, but I guess a lot of kindred are worried about what we really are. You can walk away. Many of our kind choose to live in ignorance of what it really means to be damned. You've had some time to think. I'm guessing you found the touch of Father Anthony's faith hard to ignore. For most people, God's presence is a question of faith. When I talk with Father Anthony, it feels like proof. Benoit is fervent, intense as he speaks. It's clear these questions have consumed his existence. Perhaps they'll consume yours too. What do the kindred of the Camarilla believe? The old ones. It's true, the elders are not always so good at teaching their child, or maybe the Camarilla would function better if we all knew these stories. Is it just elder? Yeah, elder just is referring to an older vampire. The vampire who has experienced at least 2 or more centuries of unlife. Elders are the most active participants in the jihad, the secret, self-destructive war waged between the ancient undead. Elder vampires tend to manipulate their lesser kin, using them as pawns in a terrible game, the rules of which defy comprehension. And it depends on what war they're fighting. They're constantly fighting each other, obviously for territory, like old middle-aged style barons and lords, which is kind of how the world works. At the same time, some are fighting against Gehenna, some are fighting other secret wars. They're just, kindred are just a very unfortunate fantasy race in this world. They are too busy ripping each other apart, but they work well enough together that they can keep off other supers for the most part. Or maybe that just speaks to the disorganization of those supers. Benoit looks around reflexively to make sure nobody is listening. There are only a few people in the enormous cathedral, and they don't seem to be interested in 2 loners murmuring to each other in the front pew. It may seem like an ancient history, things that happened thousands of years ago, but time works differently for our kind. If the stories are true, there are Methuselahs still in existence who walked the earth when Jesus was alive. Ooh, Methuselahs. So they're the, let's just read what they say here. A vampire who has existed for a millennium or more, an elder who no longer participates in kindred society. Methuselahs are rumored to hail from the 4th and 5th generations. Which is true. In my current game, the big thing is there is a Methuselah asleep under Chicago. And she's currently influencing the higher up of the Camarilla through means that the players mostly have discovered, but are still questioning bits and pieces of how. But she, as far as they are aware, has not awoken yet. She remains in a slumber. Because when you get to that old, and if you live for that long, the only thing that can slake your hunger are other kindred, and that becomes a problem, especially the hungrier you are. So Methuselahs have always, or old ancient vampires have always looked for ways to circumnavigate the need to feed, or maybe a need to even fully wake up if they just want to stay in torpor for however long. And it seems that the one sleeping under Chicago in my campaign has at least figured out some way of doing it. But as all things kindred, likely not on her own. The only problem is that old vampires lie. They adjust history to suit their egos. I was gonna say, you could talk to different elders, but they'll just give contradicting stories. Everybody will always probably focus on them. Written down, that's also not useful at all. There's so many different books that say so many different things. Some of the same books say different things in the same freaking book. Shouldn't we focus on what we can verify here and now? Our blood, the effects of Father Anthony's belief. I suppose that would be the scientific approach. Still, I can't let go of the idea that the old stories will tell us something. This is how the story goes. God cursed Cain as punishment for the murder of Abel. Cain walked the night, shunned by humanity, and drank blood to sustain himself. Even from the point of our origin, we are damned. However, The story becomes really interesting when we move forward. Cain creates more of our kind, often referred to as the second generation. Generation is the number of steps between Cain and wherever you are on that line. So basically how far descended from the first a given vampire is. Low generation provides great power, just as it does a stronger curse and hunger, which is all very true. You can superficially bump your generation by killing and devouring, by act of diablerie, the blood and the soul of a vampire, completely killing them off. But you also run the risk, if they're too powerful, of them taking over your body and just obliterating your soul, and then now they live in your body. They lived in the first city, later called Enoch, ruling openly over the city's humans and inhabitants. I see the first city as Cain's redemption. Cursed by God to wander, he remade himself as a ruler and lawgiver, acting as an immortal shepherd to humanity. It only started to go wrong when the second generation begat the third, and vampires started to run amok. Yeah, so the third generation is interesting. We should just take... Man, they're only limiting to me choices. I don't know how much of this is going to matter later in the story. What is more interesting to the viewer, because I know all these questions? I'm just going to go continue the generation talk. So the third generation, also known as the Antediluvians, who founded the great vampire clans. You can trace a direct lineage of blood to Antediluvian of your clan. Correct. So the clans, aka the classes of the game, are all descended from the third generation, the Antediluvians, who then created the fourth and fifth generations, which are typically the Methuselahs, who then went on to create 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, all the way down to where we are in modern day, 13th and 14th generation vampires. And we're so far away from the firstborn, the first blood, whether that be Cain or something else, that thin bloods and caitiffs have started to show up, which are, to some prophecies, harbingers of Gehenna, the final nights, the doom of all and all kindred. Basically, thin bloods are mixed. They are like not fully vampires, so they're still kind of mortal, and they're not exactly strong vampires, but they come with some interesting abilities. Caitiff are full-blooded, but they don't inherit a clan. For whatever reason, the clan's blood does not take. Some kindred see that as a sign of a new Cain being born. Others see it as signs of the blood becoming too thin and not being able to carry the gene anymore. Both hold merit depending on the lore you want to play with. We know much more about them than we know about the second generation. After the first city, Cain largely departs the story. Perhaps he was disheartened by the depredations of his descendants. The Antediluvians went on to build a second city in imitation of the first, but it's doubtful their rule was just. There are people moving in the cathedral, and both you and Benoit have made sure none get close enough to hear you talk. Many of the people you've seen have been elderly or disabled, so it's not surprising that you hear the squeak of a wheelchair. What alarms you more is that you overhear an older woman speaking with a Russian accent mention Father Anthony. Let's find Father Anthony and see if he can help us. From what I've heard, he is an exceptional man. You turn to look and see two men and a woman. All three are in their 50s, clearly well worn by life. One of the men pushes the woman in a wheelchair. She's dark-haired and intense, seeming only half in this world. Yeah, exceptional, but he doesn't like moles. The speaker is the shorter of the men, more animated and worried. He was probably a strong man in his youth, perhaps even an athlete. His voice carries a Midwestern accent. Oh God, I can't do Midwestern accents. We're only interested in whether he likes blank bodies. You and Benoit look at each other. This is bad news. Whoever these three are, they can't be good for you. We need to get out. Let's meet outside. Move discreetly to the side. Better not call attention to yourself. You decide to move to the side of the cathedral and pretend to pray at an altar. You walk casually towards the side, away from the three approaching mortals. You feel their eyes boring into your back, but you force yourself to be cool. Benoit is nowhere to be seen. You blinked and he disappeared in a burst of speed. You're worried it was too conspicuous, but maybe the mortals missed it. You pretend to admire the architecture for a while before glancing back at the trio. They have settled at the exact spot you just occupied, apparently waiting for something and conversing in hushed tones. Once you're sure their attention is elsewhere, you start walking briskly down the side aisle toward the exit. That was a close call. Who were those three? Did you recognize them? I might have. I'm not sure. There's talk of a few tenacious vampire hunters living in the city. One of them is supposed to be a woman in a wheelchair. Yeah, well, she called something about blank bodies. That's a derogatory term about vampires, soulless, basically. It's a way to kind of dehumanize them. For a second, Benoit looks at you as if he was wondering whether he should say something. There's one thing I've always wondered about the story of Cain. The traditions of the Camarilla put a lot of faith in the relationship between sire and child. You're supposed to follow the example of your maker, yet Cain didn't really seem to care for the vampires he embraced. Did he think it was a mistake to create our kind? We should make our own way in the world. All this talk of Cain and sires and childer makes me think we're bound to the hierarchy forever. We are, my friend, we are. Unless you want to go anarch. You know, I'm Sophie's child, and you're her protege. Oh. Now the truth comes to light. Sophie's child. That's why he's interested in us. It's amazing that we share an appreciation for mythologies of our kind, considering Sophie has little interest in questions of the spirit. You stare at Benoit. You knew there was something he wasn't telling you, but all the talk about Cain in the first city, you forgot about it. Now the only question is, what does this mean? Does Sophie know her child is talking to you? Probably not. Don't hold it against me, but I admit finding some pleasure in seeing you suffer the effects of Father Anthony's faith. I suppose that's the demon in me. I understand that you're bitter, Benoit, but I'm not your enemy. I'm sorry, I know that. It's that sometimes I just forget and get tempted by sin. You know, we should meet again. We've talked so much about myth, but maybe that's cowardly when the reality of faith is right in front of us. I'll introduce you to Father Anthony. You nod, unsure whether that's a good idea. Benoit walks away and you follow his example, not wanting to hang around the cathedral any longer. And a night passes again. Things are getting weird. Now I have to wonder, and so does Jessica, what does Sophie's child want with us?